Hey guys, Tommy with Studio Sense here. Welcome to today's video, and you notice that things look a bit different. I've tried to switch things up a bit here in the studio, kind of change the way things look. So going forward, I hope that you like the changes. I will say this, it's really hard for me when I'm talking not to move my hands, and because of that I'm constantly hitting this mic arm here. So if that happens, I'll try to edit most of it out, so sorry about that in advance, because I'm sure it's probably going to happen a lot until I get used to not like throwing this hand out there. Talking about fantasy notes today, in particular a fantasy note, and that is the note of bubblegum. Is bubblegum just for girls and kids, or is it something that us guys can get behind, and how and why? What are some fragrances in particular maybe that are sitting on your shelf right now that are bubblegum oriented fragrances? So got that and more coming your way, so stay tuned. Welcome back everyone. So today we're talking about the fantasy note of bubblegum. Bubblegum is actually a really popular note, not only in fragrance, but in quite a few things out there. You might not even realize it. The note of bubblegum, well, when you think about it, first of all, you got to kind of go back to your childhood a little bit. You might remember Bazooka, right? Or Bubblicious is another popular brand. There's also, for us guys, there's also maybe for you girls out there too who really like this, there was the Big League Chew. Remember the Big League Chew that came in the tobacco pouch? I'll show a graphic of it here if you don't remember that. My favorite was the grape, Big League Chew grape, strawberry. Really, any of the flavors were really good, and the bubblegum was just really super soft. I can remember that funny name, Tutti Frutti Malabar, also was pretty popular. Among others, there are a tremendous number of bubblegum companies out there. Here in the South, almost every restaurant you go into, there's like bubblegum machines, right? This is just a quick way of showing that bubblegum is super popular, and as a fantasy note, it's actually even breached the industry of fragrance, and specifically also fragrance for men. So what are some fragrances right now that may even be sitting on your shelf that are kind of a bubblegum oriented, to kind of give you an idea of what bubblegum fragrances smell like? First of all, it's important to know that bubblegum often gets confused with other fantasy notes. And what in particular is a fantasy note? Well, just like the name implies, it's a note that doesn't exist in nature. It's actually created. For example, cotton candy is a fantasy note that often gets confused with bubblegum. Certain fruits are kind of a fantasy note. Very popular Creed Aventus has a pineapple note in it. Pineapple, while it's a real fruit, is a fantasy note in fragrance because there's no pineapple oil that you can use in, to create a fragrance. There's not a bubblegum tree out there that you can plug a hose into, or a bubblegum plant, so it is an actual fantasy note. It's not edible, but it is still considered gourmand because it's also very sweet. What are some examples of bubblegum fragrances for men? Well, the first example that I wanted to bring your attention to is the very popular Paco Rabanne's Invictus. The Victory Cup Invictus. Now, Invictus is a very sweet, youthful-oriented fragrance for men, a very popular one of the most popular fragrances, and I'll put this down after showing it so that my camera doesn't freak out in terms of focus. One of the very first things that you'll notice when you smell Invictus for the first time is that very, almost aquatic, sweet, it's got kind of a water-based or waterborne kind of sweetness to it that is very similar to bubblegum. In fact, it smells similar to, some say it smells similar to juicy fruit, right? Which makes sense. And again, kind of coincides with the idea that bubblegum is often confused with fruit juices or fruits, because bubblegum is actually taken from fruits, right? It's kind of taken a note from different kind of fruits, how they smell when combined. So that's how the flavor or the smell of bubblegum even came into existence, is when you combine certain fruits that are just very, very sweet and very bright. That's how we get bubblegum. So a lot of fruits, a lot of sweetness can be combined in such a way as that it comes across like bubblegum. And Invictus is a very bubblegum oriented fragrance, and so it goes to follow that any Invictus clone is going to smell very similar to bubblegum. While this next fragrance isn't outright an Invictus clone, it is very much in line with an Invictus style fragrance. It is by Hugo Boss. It is Boss Bottled United, the silver fragrance. Now this does have an eau de parfum version that's a bit darker, but this one's got that whole bubblegum vibe to it, although not quite as sweet as Invictus is. This has a couple different kinds of mint. It's got something called Boohoo. It's got the blood orange in it. So again, that combination of wildly different kind of fruits jammed together. It's a really good offering or option for summertime. Also can be worn in winter because of those mints in it, both the spearmint and the peppermint. There's something happens when it's mixed with kind of cool weather that's really refreshing and kind of eye-opening. Another fragrance that might be sitting on your shelf right now that is also very similar to Boss Bottled United and to Invictus, and in fact is probably Mont Blanc's answer to Invictus, is Mont Blanc Legend Spirit. Legend Spirit, just like the bottle looks like, it's very light, it's very bright. It's got that whole bubblegum vibe to it, and this one is a bit sweeter than Boss Bottled United and therefore a little bit closer to the Invictus style fragrance. I think Mont Blanc did something in Spirit though that absolutely nails the bubblegum experience, but to me this is a bit more juicy fruit than it is bazooka or bubblicious. So it's not quite as sweet, and I think they hit that middle distance in terms of sweetness versus youthful vitality, and they did it perfect in Legend Spirit. So Legend Spirit to me is kind of a nice answer between Invictus and Boss Bottle United. So if you don't like either one, you're looking for something that kind of splits the difference, definitely check out Mont Blanc Legend Spirit. The next fragrance I want to feature that you may have sitting on your shelf that smells very similar to that whole fantasy note of bubblegum is a fragrance by Davidoff. It is Davidoff Run Wild. Run Wild to me smells like a strawberry bubblicious, kind of, sort of. It's got that whole vibe to it. Now, a number of Davidoff fragrances have a very sweet, cheap kind of overall tonality or quality about them. This actually doesn't. I really like Run Wild for that fact. It's got that whole kind of a lavender, strawberry, and there's some camphor coming from that lavender as well in the background, so it's pushing that forward. This actually has a really nice, very pleasant scent trail. But if you're looking for a masculine fragrance that has that kind of strawberry bubblicious bent to it, look no further than Davidoff Run Wild. The next fragrance that smells like bubblegum that you may have sitting on your shelf right now is a fragrance by the German house of Joop. It is Joop Homme, either the original or the eau de parfum. The reason I'm holding up the eau de parfum is because I actually like it a lot better than the original. However, some argue that the original smells more like bubblegum than does the eau de parfum. To me, you're just splitting hairs because it's tomato. I mean, they both have that kind of bubblegum tartness to it, a little bit of sour, but more sweet. This is a very different fragrance for men, and while there's definitely a group out there that lives by Joop Homme, the original Joop Homme, I don't really care for it as much as some of those hardcore Joop lovers out there. But I will say the eau de parfum has grown on me, partly due to the fact that it has that nice bubblegum kind of background to it. There's a little bit of spicy in this bubblegum that doesn't exist in the original Joop. So if you have the original Joop Homme but not the eau de parfum, never fear, the original smells very similar in terms of that whole bubblegum vibe. I just happen to like the spices in this one a bit better, and it's going to be a bit better for colder weather as well. That is Joop Homme by Joop. Another fragrance that you would never think of when it comes to the fantasy note of bubblegum, and yet there is something at the very epicenter or the very core of this fragrance when you're first experiencing it. After about 10-15 minutes, it falls within the realm of bubblegum, but then it kind of when it dries down, that kind of goes away, is a fragrance by Viktor and Rolf. It is none other than Spice Bomb Extreme. When you're getting the first very effusively dark, rich, tobacco-oriented fragrance, when it's coming at you before it actually dries down, so in the open and in the mid, it very much strikes me as kind of a bubblegum, kind of sweet fragrance, although albeit the most masculine bubblegum you'll ever experience. It has that very bright fruits jam-packed, so dark and dense that it smells like bubblegum, and I really like that about it. I like the fact that it doesn't super last into the dry down because, I don't know, tobacco and bubblegum may not be the best mix. Maybe we're missing out though, who knows. In terms of smelling like bubblegum, the window is about 20 minutes on this one, but I do really enjoy it while it's there. So this is one of the few fragrances that I enjoy every iteration, and the dry down, of course, is the best, its finest hour or hours, and that is Spice Bomb Extreme by Viktor and Rolf. Out of all of these fragrances though, to me the one that most reminds me of bubblegum in terms of like the bazooka or the original bubblicious kind of pink bubblegum is a fragrance by Jean-Paul Gaultier, and it is Ultramall. However, if you don't have Ultramall and you just have a regular rendition of La Mall, you're perfectly safe because Le Male has that same bubblegum orientation. It's just a little bit sweeter, a little bit heavier in Ultramale. You know, you've heard the phrase, you know, I wear many hats, meaning that you do many different things that are not necessarily associated one with the other. It's like multitasking. Fragrances can often wear many hats or multitask as well, and one of those facets is bubblegum, and that's what I love about Jean Paul Gaultier's Le Male and Ultramale, is that it's such a masculine, sweet, sexy fragrance, and yet it does smell like bubblegum. You know, it puts bubblegum in the territory of sexy, which I don't think anything else really does better, at least, than these fragrances, and in particular, Le Male or Ultramale. There are many different components that make up Ultramale. Of course, the ones that make it smell the most like bubblegum are going to be the head-on lavender, the clary sage, and the sweet fruits combined together in such a way that it puts you in mind of sweet bubblegum. Now, judging the fantasy note of bubblegum by being associated with cotton candy and even certain fruits, it's not a stretch to think that many fragrances out there for men have that kind of bubblegum background, and in particular, YSL's Y, whether it's Y Live or Y the Eau de Parfum version, even Y the Le Parfum version, but lesser so. These definitely have that kind of youthful bubblegum background vibe, but it's done in such a way that that's not your primary attention getter. There are other masculine qualities about the fragrance that are more attention getting, but that's part of it, right? That's part of that whole complete package. It's easy to see why bubblegum then is very important as a fantasy note in men's fragrance, as it mixes with other and subsidizes other notes. But when you bring the note of bubblegum forward in the foreground as a primary note, you better have the Yahtzee to back it up, right? It's got to have the chops to be able to hold its own. One of the fragrances you might want to consider is Moschino's Toy 2. Toy 2 is literally bubblegum 24/7, 365. It is all about that sweet bubblegum fantasy note, and it does it really, really well. It is a super dense, very heavy, very bubblegum laden fragrance. It's got tremendous performance, very similar to the original Toy Boy, though not as rose centric. So again, if you're all about that bubblegum, check out Toy 2. It's a very, I don't know, I never thought I would say quality bubblegum fragrance, but this definitely is a quality bubblegum fragrance. Well guys, that's it for my 7 fragrances that smell very similar to bubblegum or make use of that bubblegum fantasy note that may be sitting on your shelf right now. If you don't own any of these and you're interested in purchasing any one of them, of course, there are links below that you can click on to check them out. But if you have these, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, or if there are other bubblegum oriented fragrances out there, and there are a ton of them. Trust me when I say a lot more than you might realize when you start looking for them. Tell me what some of your favorites are that I didn't mention in the comments below as well. Thanks so much though for stopping by, checking out today's video, and as always, thank you so much for your support on my channel. I'm Tommy with Studio Sense, and I'll see you tomorrow.